Evening there everyone, it is I, the most scruffy looking of nerf herders, back again to talk about some more Star Wars Unlimited cards that we had revealed. Now I was away for the last 10 days, so there's been quite a large amount of cards revealed for Twilight of the Republic. So rather than try and do all these in one video and probably collapse at the end of it, I'm going to space these out a little bit. So today we're going to catch up on 17 of the cards that I left off with. And in the next video, we'll do the remaining cards plus anything that gets revealed in the next couple of days. But before we do, a quick shout out to all the content creators that helped spoil all of these cards. With 212 Toman Taha, I apologise, I probably pronounced that wrong. Hannons, Fanthetrax, Ryback Stun, iRebel, Ice Crave Radio, Unplayable, and Darth Players. So in this video, we've got a couple of new leaders to take a look at. One in particular I think is very, very interesting and kind of changes my evaluation on a particular mechanic that's part of this new set. Before we do, there's just a few cards that don't really fit into any sort of broad category, so I just want to talk about them individually. So in no particular order, we have Clone Heavy Gunner, a 2-resource 1/3 that is a 3/3 when you have Coordinate. A decent little Coordinate payoff, I think mainly for draft, but I think the main problem with this is it's a bad rate for a 1/3 and it's just frequently going to turn into a 1/3. You say you play this on turn 1, you manage to create 2 more Clone Troopers on turn 2, something that's very, very realistic with the cards that we have revealed so far. All your opponent has to do is remove one of them and suddenly this is a bad rate unit, so yeah, whatever. We also have Equalize. This is a 3-resource tactic event. Double Vigilant Aspect. Give a unit -2, -2 for this phase. Then if you control fewer units than that unit's controller, give another unit -2, -2 for this phase. And this one interests me a lot because it sort of adds to the critical mass of double blue removal we have. It makes it much more easy to play decks that want to play on aspect copies of Vigilance. A card that is so good that people frequently play it off aspect for 6 resources. But if you want to play double blue, guess what? There's another great piece of removal. It's interesting putting it in this set because it sort of wants you to play fewer, more powerful units, or just fewer units in general. The ability to remove 2 units with 1 card is no joke. It's not always going to hit everything. It's not always going to be super relevant on every board. Perhaps it's a sideboard card for that reason, but I just think it looks really, really solid. I don't know if this goes alongside, say, Obi-Wan, for example. My gut says he probably wants to pair with a different color, but might end up being really important for those Vigilance decks nonetheless. We have Geonosis Patrol Fighter, a 5-resource 3/2 with Exploit 2, so it can be as cheap as 3 resources. And when played, you may return a non-leader unit that costs 3 or less to its owner's hand. It's also a Separatist Vehicle Fighter. It's a space unit. And I think this is going to be more for your Exploit draft decks in particular. I don't love the rate when you pay it for full cost. I'm noticing, especially with these commons, the better exploit payoffs tend to be at higher rarities where, even if you're paying full cost, they don't feel terrible. Where this one for 5 is okay. You know, if it's making your opponent pick up a relevant unit, I mean, it completely removes a Clone Trooper token if your opponent happens to be playing those. Yeah, that kind of makes me more interested in this. I'm just not sure if it's going to be super relevant all the time. Plus, it's yellow. I don't think the exploit decks in like Premiere are going to want to run yellow, at least alongside what we've seen so far. I just see this as being an okay draft card. Mr. Bones, and this is an interesting one. A 1-resource double aggression aspect 3/1 Fringe Droid. It's a ground unit. And on attack, if you have no cards in hand, you may deal 3 damage to a ground unit. And the obvious home for this is in a Kylo Ren deck. It means that a double red Kylo deck gets access to yet one more 1-resource 3/1 at the floor. You can play your 3 copies of your Death Star Stormtroopers and this alongside them, to make sure that you potentially get 2-3 runs out on turn 1 a little bit more consistently. But obviously the roof on this is it gets to just nug random ground units, which just feels great. So it's a nice addition to that deck. I don't know how relevant the rest of this set's going to be for double red Kylo, but a fun card nonetheless. You know, outside of that, if you don't sort of play into the upside of this card, you stick it in like a double red, say, Bo-Katan deck or something like that, it's fine. It's still a 3/1 for 1. If those decks don't get access to Death Star Stormtroopers, they're playing the heroic aspect like Bo-Katan would. Yeah, it's okay. I mean, the flaw in this card makes it okay in those decks. Ultimately, though, I think you really want to play into that upside. So, yeah, double red Kylo, that's what this one's for. Okay, let's talk about some more interesting stuff. We've got a couple of leaders to talk about, but first of all, I want to have a look at this new unit that got revealed. We have General Grievous, a 3-resource ground unit in the Vigilance and Villainy aspect. 4/4 Separatist official ground unit. Ignore the aspect penalty on each lightsaber upgrade you play on this unit. On attack, if this unit has 4 or more lightsaber upgrades attached to him, defeat 4 enemy units. Also paired up alongside the reveal of this card was a fine addition. This is a 0 cost, also Vigilance Villainy aspect event card. It has a supply trait. If an enemy unit was defeated this phase, play an upgrade from your hand or from any player's discard pile, ignoring its aspect penalty. And the flavour of this is obviously Grievous taking their lightsaber as a trophy. But remember, it just says play an upgrade from your hand or any player's discard pile. It didn't have to be a lightsaber that was on that unit. It didn't have to be any kind of upgrade that was on that unit. Anything in the discard pile, take it. It's a fine addition to your collection. I have a feeling that a lot of particularly less experienced in the TCG space, Star Wars Unlimited players, are going to very soon learn what it means to be a Timmy. For those of you who don't know, Timmy is a psychographic. This is a collection of descriptive terms used to describe TCG players, specifically created by Mark Rosewater, the head of design of Magic the Gathering. One of those is called Timmy. It describes a player who is particularly excited by big flashy cards, big splashy effects, and tends to ignore the sort of consistency and cost of things, will happily just jam in really cool looking powerful cards into their deck when it doesn't necessarily give them the best win rate. And just before we go any further, I'm not saying it's a bad thing that these things are printed. I think learning about different draft environments, different set environments, you know, the kind of different kinds of designs that appeal to different people. It's great to have all these kinds of things. I just want to urge some people not to get too starry-eyed about effects like this, because it is really, really, really hard to trigger that on-attack trigger on the General Grievous card. So if we're going to competitively evaluate it, yeah, look, he's a 4/4 for 3, and if you can find a lot of utility for playing him alongside of copies of a fine edition, yeah, it might be okay. Maybe it's even like a decent sideboard package you can put into, say, like a Darth Vader deck or something that's, you know, already playing some copies of some lightsabers, that you can sort of make that happen. That's realistically, I think, where it's going to be most comfortable. The build around, the real all-in kind of strategy, I think, is a bit of a trap on this one. Largely in part is this is a unit that is randomly drawn from your deck, not your leader unit, so you can't rely on getting access to it all the time. If you're doing an all-in build around over something like this, yes, it's really cool when you pull it off, but the times you don't draw Grievous, it's going to feel really, really bad. Look, with all that out of the way, let's just have a bit of fun brainstorming here for a second. I see this card, based on what we know of this new set so far, and what we already have in the game, working alongside, say, something like Darth Vader as a leader. That gives you the most access to just generic Force units that can take advantage of lightsaber cards in your deck. You know, you can run copies of Vader's lightsaber and Fallen lightsaber, just jam in a bunch of Force units, and that's just great. There's already some nice payoffs for the Force trait. There's Force Choke, Force Lightning, all that kind of stuff. And maybe you can just make that deck blue and, you know, just jam in some copies of General Grievous and a fine edition into that deck, and just occasionally you spike out and use that ability. I just feel that's too likely to affect the consistency of that deck. The reality is, as boring as it might be, you're probably better off just, you know, filling out your curves with Death Star Stormtroopers, Interceptors, that kind of stuff. Leaning in strategies like this might just be a little bit too fringe, and it might just ruin the consistency of that deck too much. You know, just stick to a solid mid-range strategy, and maybe that's going to be the better deck ultimately. Having said that, we haven't seen every card from this set just yet. Maybe there'll be another good and evil lightsaber like there was in set 1. I'd say there's a pretty good chance of that. And I think if that all comes together, if there's, you know, one other lightsaber we can chuck in this deck as a 3 of, it might be okay. Just be aware that Grievous doesn't have the Force trait himself, and one thing I will say is probably don't play off-aspect lightsabers just because they work on Grievous. Again, if you draw them and you don't draw Grievous, that just feels terrible. You're not going to play off-aspect lightsabers on your other Force units. So yeah, that's my thoughts on this kind of card. If any of you watching managed to pull this off and, you know, take it to your local, something like that, manage to board wipe your opponent while you swing in with a massive General Grievous, take a picture and drop it on my Discord. I'd like to see it happen. I'm just not confident it will consistently. Okay, now the leaders. Sticking to the bad guys, let's have a look at Jango Fett. Jango Fett is in the cunning and villainy aspects. On his leader side, when a friendly unit deals damage to an enemy unit, you may exhaust its leader. If you do, exhaust that enemy unit. He can use his epic to deploy when you have 5 resources as a 3/7 Underworld Bounty Hunter ground unit. And when a friendly unit deals damage to an enemy unit, you may exhaust that unit. So same text, you're just not limited to using that once per turn. Now we also had revealed on the doorstep, and I'll just talk about this card in relation to Jango, because I think it's going to be a pretty solid card to put alongside him. A 4 resource, again, Cunning Villainy Supply event. Create 3 Battle Droid tokens and ready them. So the reason I want to bring up this card in particular, apart from the fact that it was spoiled around about the same time, is it's going to give you sort of one of the 2 main strategies that I see Jango potentially working in. You can use like an exploit shell and just have these little crappy 1/1s that can just charge down your opponent's units. Yes, you're going to have to cash them in every time you do that, but you can tap down large things. You know, if your opponent has a Vader unit, you can just walk one of your little 1/1 battle droids into it, deal 1 damage to him, and he can't swing back. That feels pretty good, actually. It may play a little awkwardly because you do have to cash in your tokens in order to do that, but it makes a different, interesting angle on the potential exploit shells we're going to see after this set's revealed. Yellow is an interesting color for exploit. There's been a few interesting payoffs. I mean, if there is a shell for that, it'll be paired with green. Maybe you have Jango with an ECL base or something like that. And, you know, you can play your Krakens, your Kalanis, all that kind of stuff, and, you know, do all the nonsense I've spoken about when we were discussing Dooku. Whether or not this is better than Dooku, I'm not too sure, but at the same time, Dooku won't get access to all the yellow events that, you know, tap your opponent's units down, return them to their hands. Yellow is just one of those colors that always introduces an interesting game strategy. So it could be interesting, I just don't think all the pieces are there right now. Now, the other way we can use Jango Fett is finding ways to get your friendly units to deal damage to your opponent's units outside of combat. And there's a few different ways of doing this, and based on clarifications we've been getting through social media posts, if you have upgrades on your units that use the language, you know, you deal damage, it does trigger with Jango. It is treated as that unit dealing damage to those units. Now, if that changes for whatever, if this information isn't quite right in terms of the judgment, again, this is just social media posts from the devs, so I'm not even going to post it here, then so be it. Having said all that, I think realistically, this is the kind of stuff we really need to make sure Jango's pulling his weight. Stuff like Van Brandt's Flamethrower, Overwhelming Barrage, all those kinds of things. Could be a lot of fun with this. Having said that, when you're playing cards like these, you generally just want to be destroying your opponent's units, not just doing little pings across them, especially like Overwhelming Barrage. You don't want to play that just to tap your opponent's units down. You want to play it as a massive blowout that can remove several of your opponent's units. But it's interesting nonetheless. Bit of an elephant in the room, though. He has worse stats than Boba Fett, as in the Set 1 Boba Fett, who comes out as a 4/7 for the same resource cost, and it's really hard in my mind to justify taking Jango over Boba, especially when the stats are better. Boba's ability just seems way more versatile in many situations. And when Jango is fun to build around, you know, Boba can just cheat you on your resource cost of things. He's able to ready more resources in exchange for removing your opponent's units, and that's something you just want to do to win a game of Star Wars Unlimited anyway. You're rewarded for playing the game. Where Jango Fett is a bit more, I don't want to say janky, but it's a bit more of an all-in build-around. I'm feeling Boba's the better option right now, but who knows? I quite like Van Brandt's Flamethrower. I play it in my Bo-Katan deck. It's a very, very fun card. A little janky, a little expensive, but you could tat down units with it. That could be quite good. Okay, let's talk about something which I think is really, really hype. We had revealed this Captain Rex leader, and there's a whole slew of cards talk alongside this because I think it all sort of really neatly fits into the kind of shell that he's going to want. So I'll actually start with the Captain Rex leader this time because with all these other cards we want to mention, I kind of want to keep bringing it back to Captain Rex because so many aspects of this are so relevant to this leader. So Captain Rex is a command heroic aspect leader. He has action, 2 resources, and tap him. If a friendly unit attack this phase, create a clone trooper token. And he can deploy on 5 resources, and he is a 2/6 Republic clone trooper ground unit when deployed. When deployed, create a clone trooper token, and each other friendly trooper gets +0/+1. So yes, on the front side, it is not the easiest thing in the world to activate, but all you've got to do is attack with a unit. The coordinate deck, I think, is going to want to be low to the ground and aggressive anyway, so I don't actually think, despite the fact it costs 2 resources, I don't think that's the craziest thing to try and activate. It's certainly much easier than Padme. Oh, by the way, this just, in my mind, almost completely invalidates Padme. This, to me, is the coordinate leader you want. I think consistently these kinds of decks are going to want to play a unit on turn 1 and generate 2 units on turn 2. And Captain Rex just gives you a lot more consistency in doing that. You can just play manufactured soldiers on turn 2 and generate 2 more tokens. You can also play, thanks to Captain Rex, a 1-drop, which we have access to a few of those now, and use Captain Rex's ability. Assuming you attacked with whatever you played on turn 1, I think that flexibility is going to be really, really important. And also getting to deploy him on 5 and immediately getting 2 units is fantastic. This is the kind of thing that really, in my mind, helps you pay off those slightly more expensive coordinate payoffs, because you always have access to something that can generate you 2 units, deploy your leader fairly early in the game, plus it also helps protect your clone trooper tokens as well. Speaking of which, let's just have a quick look through all the other cards as well I want to talk about that were revealed. We have both Phase 1 and Phase 2 clone troopers. The Phase 1 is a 2 resource 3/2. The Phase 2 is also a 3/2, but it's 3 resources and it gets ambush for that extra 1 resource that you pay. Now, I think these 2 cards are largely designed for draft. It means that your coordinate decks in any color, even the more fringe ones like, yellow or blue, will have access to units to play without needing to splash into any different colors or anything specifically. I also think these might be relevant because I really am seeing double green in these more dedicated exploit and now coordinate decks as well. It might be a case of, when we see everything come together with this set, that there just might not be a big enough glut of cards to support a double green coordinate deck. And that's where these cards come in, because they can go in a double green coordinate deck and not be played off aspect. They add flexibility in both draft and creativity when we're building decks for Premiere as well. So it's good to see these. Neither of them are a great rate. Neither of them are going to be like, the most exciting card to draw as a top deck. Having said that, they may be necessary just to make sure we have enough cards to make these decks consistent. We also had a couple of events revealed in Sword and Shield Maneuver and Synchronized Strike. Sword and Shield Maneuver is a Jedi Republic tactic trait, 2 resource heroic event. Give each friendly trooper unit raid 1 for this phase, and give each friendly Jedi unit Sentinel for this phase. This is an interesting one. It kind of demands that you play a specific mix of troopers and Jedis. So like 60-40 troopers to Jedis feels about right for this. Making sure you have at least 1 Sentinel out, but in terms of, things you want to give keywords en masse, you want to give them as many things raid as possible. Giving multiple things Sentinel isn't always great, because it means your opponent can still adapt and, pick different targets. When you're giving something Sentinel, it's often best just to give 1 thing Sentinel. And again, I like that this isn't using any color but heroic, which means it can still go in those double green decks. Maybe it wants to go in like the blue decks if Obi-Wan has some kind of coordinate shell. And hey, look, if things come together and we're really, really consistently getting a lot of units on the board, this seems like a really decent overwhelm effect. The Magical Christmas Land scenario is you have, say, like 1 Jedi, like 3 or 4 troopers. Maybe a bit wishful thinking, but bear with me on this. And you play this, your opponent can't use their attacks to destroy those troopers. And you just use that incremental advantage to deal more damage to the base, and maybe that's, the last thing you play before you win the game. Could be decent. I am worried that you probably just want to be playing more units than, cards like this. But it might be an okay thing to pair alongside those things. Just to be mindful of the makeup of the deck. You don't want to play too many effects like this. Synchronized Strike is interesting. Again, I'm going to... I know I sound like a broken record here. I'm going to keep going back to that idea of the double green deck that plays Coordinate. This may end up being super, super important because it might be the only consistent removal piece that deck can get. For 2 resources in the Command and Heroic aspect, it's a tactic event. Deal damage to an enemy unit equal to the number of units you control in its arena. That deck may not have access to much removal, so this could be super, super important. Just remember that this piece of removal could be a little bit problematic because it doesn't do anything unless you have a lot of units on the board. And look, I know the Coordinate deck pretty much falls apart if it doesn't have lots of things on the board anyway, but it kind of sucks if you're trying to sort of rebuild after your opponent like wipes out a bunch of your units, say they play a board wipe or something like that. And this is the card that you top deck. It'd really be nice if you drew some removal that could deal with your opponent's units. Say they have 1 or 2 big problematic things out on the board that you can't deal with anymore. Yeah, so in certain matchups, in certain situations, it might be a bit of a dead card. Just be aware of that. Maybe look at some, ambush effects, that kind of stuff. But I still think this will be a staple in a deck regardless. Okay, there's a few more units to have a look at. Let's start off with Ayla Secura, a 5 resource command heroic 6/5 Force Jedi Republic ground unit. And when you have Coordinate, she gains, on attack, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to this unit for this attack, which is really fun and aggressive. I don't know how many cards like this the Coordinate deck's really going to want to play. It's a 5 resource investment that only gets you 1 more unit. It's going to feel terrible if your opponent just finds a way to remove this. The trigger's really, really good. Like, it can lead to a massive blowout, but it is only preventing combat damage on that particular attack. It doesn't protect her when she gets attacked after that point, even within the same phase. Yeah, look, it's okay. I don't love that this kind of effect is in Legendary. This doesn't feel very exciting or splashy, in my opinion. Look, that's just me. I think there's probably going to be some slightly better cards that this deck's going to want at this kind of cost, one of which we'll talk about in a second. But first of all, let's have a look at Admiral Yularen. 3 resource, again in Command and Heroic, a 2/5 Republic official ground unit. Restore 1, and each friendly heroic unit gets +0/+1. And while he doesn't have some amazing Coordinate payoff, he doesn't generate any extra Clone Trooper tokens. He helps protect them, and if you have a deck that can generate a lot of Clone Trooper tokens, well, guess what? That deck suddenly has a lot more HP if you're running a card like this. Yeah, he just seems really, really solid. Doesn't hurt that he has Restore 1 as well. It can be relevant sometimes. Plus, he has 5 HP himself. Feels like a nice stall to any aggressive tactics your opponent might have. He's hard to kill, and he makes your Clone Trooper tokens harder to kill as well. So, decent card, and I think is pretty much going to be stapled into the Rex deck. As a 2 or 3 of quite comfortably. Now, this next card, this is the one that really sells me on the Captain Rex Coordinate deck and Coordinate in general. This is Clone Commander Cody. 5 resource command. Not heroic because he betrayed Obi-Wan, spoiler alert. He is a 4/4 Republic Clone Trooper ground unit. He has Overwhelm and Coordinate. Each other friendly unit gets +1/+1 and gains Overwhelm. Now you might look at this and think this is just another janky Coordinate payoff. Nick, what are you talking about? Why are you so excited? I'm excited because of how well this works alongside Captain Rex. He can come out the same turn as Captain Rex. This means once you get to 5 resources, from an empty board state, you can have Coordinate online. You can have, and I've got to do all the math here, so you'll have a 4/5 Overwhelm, a 3/7 Overwhelm, and a 3/4 with Overwhelm. For 5 resources and only 1 card from your hand. This play pattern seems obscenely powerful. And yes, I know Coordinate switches off if your opponent removes just that Clone Trooper token. They don't have to have something super powerful. They can just nug that token. The token already has 4 toughness just because of these cards alone. If, say, the turn before you played Admiral Yularen, all of these units I just mentioned also has an extra point of HP. Apart from anything else, the situation I was talking about was an empty board state. It's not likely going to be what happens in this deck. There is a lot of really solid 2 and 3 resource cards that really help you solidify a solid board state early on. And I gotta say, when Coordinate was first revealed, specifically with the cards we saw in the starter deck, I wasn't really that on board. Having a look at these cards though, I think it's going to be legit. Captain Rex looks like he's just going to be really, really solid. I am thinking more in the double green space because you can play things like manufactured soldiers. Plus, you know, you can play ECL. You can ambush in Clone Commander Cody, all that kind of nonsense. I'm a broken record at this stage. We know that's going to be a reality with basically anything that can play green. But having said that, I think there's going to be a good case to play Captain Rex alongside red. There's some pretty decent red payoffs for a coordinate at this stage. You do also get access to 2 Clone Troopers for 3 resources in Batch Brothers in that deck as well. You know, and there's some fun things like Anakin Skywalker and like kind of stuff. I really like manufactured soldiers in this deck. And I also really like Maz Amida. Just being able to select cards, make sure that you get them out in the right order. You get that consistent early game strategy where you can generate as many tokens as possible. And just have a really, really solid board turn 3 or 4, just deploying these payoffs with Captain Rex alongside. It just seems like a really, really solid package. And yeah, I'm jazzed for it. Double green with Captain Rex or Count Dooku. I didn't think they were going to go as hard with these token strategies as they did. And more to the point now that we've seen how hard they are pushing these strategies. In terms of the way the game is balanced, in terms of the meta, I think injecting this into the game now is really going to shift things up. Removal is going to play very differently. There's going to be a lot more 2-for-1s. The way the cards line up and get played is going to feel fundamentally different. There's a good chance a lot of players are going to get annoyed by that, but ultimately I think generating token units, you know, just like generating token creatures in Magic, it's just going to be a fundamental part of this game. We're still in the early phases while FFG are sort of really solidifying what those core elements are going to be, and it's going to be something that we cycle back to every few sets. That's my main prediction here. The strategy might feel a bit overpowered in this initial release, but I think in the long term it's going to be a lot of fun. Alright, thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to jump on the Discord. Come and chat about all these new cards, and in the next video I'll catch up to where we currently are with the spoilers. There's another really interesting lead to talk about in the next video, and as well as one of the new rare bases. But with all that out of the way, don't forget to like and subscribe, comment, do all the fun stuff that makes the algorithm happy. Ring that bell! I've heard some YouTubers say that in the past. And I'll catch you all in the next video.